Good afternoon. My name is David Lewis, and it's my pleasure to join you all today or have you join us for Mediation Week 2021 with the ABA. And glad you decided to tune into this presentation. I think it's a really exciting topic. It's a topic I've worked on for a number of years, and all of our esteemed panelists have done a lot of work in this field, and it's a really important field for the future of mediation. The title of this presentation is Feedback and Peer Review, Mapping the Future of Professional Mediation Practice Towards Better Rapport, Resolutions, and Results. And what we're going to discuss briefly today, and each of our panelists in turn will discuss it from a different mediation stylistic perspective. We have with us today a specialist in inclusive mediation, Ms. Tracy Ford. We have Mr. Sterling Phillips, a specialist in facilitative practice, and we have Ms. Sherry Tardio, a specialist in transformative practice. So we're going to have the privilege today to listen to three very experienced practitioners who've dealt with feedback and mediator professional development in different contexts. And it all happens to be within the state of Maryland, actually. So they're going to give perspectives on how feedback and peer review can reinforce professional development and help practitioners to build their mediation practice skills as well as knowledge. And then we're going to turn to look a little bit at certification processes and how those can also help when they're peer reviewed to reinforce those key professional skills. My background is in mediation, mostly as an academic. I've looked into a lot of different certification processes and actually did a comparative fellowship in Canada with Fulbright, looking at ADR professional regulation development and certification. If I turn to Ms. Tracy Ford, and if she could introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Ford. I'm Director of Quality Development for Community Mediation Model. We practice and train folks in the inclusive mediation model. And I have been trainer with CMM for about 16 years now.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Tracy. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
And Mr. Sterling Phillips, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hello, everybody. This is Sterling Phillips. I'm a mediator with DC Office of Human Rights, so I'm here today to, in a personal capacity, to present. And I have been mediating over a number of about 15 years in both for the in a variety of capacities for the Maryland Council for Dispute Resolution, for the Community Conflict Resolution Center in Montgomery County, and both primarily in the facilitation process. I'm doing employment and fair housing mediation currently. I'm glad to be here on the panel and past president of MCDR.
Thanks so much, Sterling. Really appreciate you bringing your wealth of experience here today and being able to elucidate some perspectives from your experience and from the facilitative practice. And last but certainly not least is Ms. Sherry Tardio. Can you introduce yourself?
Certainly. I'm Sherry Tardio, and I'm the director of the Community Mediation Center of Calvert, which is located in Southern Maryland. I've been a mediator for a little over 10 years, and I do a good part of the recruitment and training of our all volunteer mediator family here in Southern Maryland.
Well, thank you, Sherry. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks for bringing your wealth of experience from the transformative practice to this forum, because it's always important to have that voice present, and it isn't always there. So thanks a lot for bringing that perspective.
Thank you for including it.
Of course, we're we don't just include inclusive, we also include facilitative and transformative, that's how we roll. Well, let's kick this off with the key question. Why feedback for mediators? And, how did it start in your organization or in your experience that you came to understand the value of feedback and you started implementing it as a best practice? You want to start, Tracy?
Sure. So I remember my basic training like it was yesterday. And even though it was 18 years ago now, I learned to give and receive feedback before I even got to the role play table, before I even started practicing mediating. And what I was taught was that it is an important part of how we grow this movement and how we make sure that we are giving participants our very best. And so feedback for me begins even before the participants arrive, like when we are preparing as mediators and when I'm preparing with my co-mediator, one of my first questions is, what is it that you're working on? What do you want to make sure that I give you feedback on? So that we're dealing with that at the very beginning. And today as a trainer, I tell people that you still want to ask that question. And there's two wrong answers to that question. What is it you're working on? One wrong answer is everything. Because if you're working on everything, you're really working on nothing. And then the other wrong answer is nothing. So I recommend that people identify, 2 to 3 things that they want to focus on receiving feedback about. Not that they shut down feedback about any other things, but that they always have 2 to 3 things that they're really working on developing and growing as a mediator. So we're doing that as part of our setting that expectation to give and receive feedback as part of the prep. And then we are setting aside at least half an hour at the end of the mediation to give feedback. And, it's also a chance to kind of decompress after the case, but also to focus on how can we support each other in our growth and development as mediators, because that's the essential tool. Like whatever we do, however hard we're thinking we're working as mediators, the real people doing the heavy lifting in any mediation case are the participants. They're the ones that are having to sit down in front of people that they may be having difficult conversations and difficult conflict with. And so the very least we can do to support that is making sure that we're coming as our best mediator. And we cannot do that without support from each other through the form of feedback. And not just hearing what we did wrong, but also what it is that we're doing well, so that we'll continue to do that. We might have done something just kind of shooting from the hip and didn't realize how effective that particular strategy was. And so it's important that we give our co-mediators those things that they're doing well. In inclusive mediation model, we call them pluses, as well as those areas for growth. In inclusive mediation model, we call those areas for growth deltas, like the mathematical sign for change. So making spaces for pluses and deltas, and any questions I have about any strategies that my co-mediator and I used, and how effective it was. Does that answer the question, David? I want to make sure I leave space for everybody to talk.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great intro to feedback in the inclusive model, and really appreciate you speaking to that. I really like what you said about reinforcing the positive and recognizing the positive, because it's so easy to be looking for the faults. When you're looking at someone's performance, looking at what you wouldn't do instead of what they're doing great. And in fact, as you said, what's going to give energy, that one-off thing that you didn't know you did, but it's actually really energizing and amazing, and something we should recognize and maybe incorporate into our best practices. So I think that's great, and really gets to the heart of how that can help mediators who are getting feedback, but also help the mediators who are giving the feedback to realize potential that they didn't even know was there. So thanks so much for sharing that, Tracy.
You.
Sterling, could you elucidate us a little bit from the facilitative perspective and your experience in particular, working with mediation in a professional setting, but also, your experience with MCDR and their feedback models.
Sure. Let me just share a quick short story from Pastor Bayless Conley. Pablo Casals was one of the greatest cellists in the world. And one day a young reporter asked him, "You're 95, and yet you're still practicing 6 hours a day. Why?" To which Casals responded, "Because I think I'm making progress." And that's the premise for our feedback assessment process. We know that if you're going to be a great athlete, we just had the Olympics, you got to practice, you got to keep working at it. And we believe that mediators and attorneys need refinement and practice to keep making progress. And that's how we, in developing also our certification program for the Maryland Council for Dispute Resolution, we term MCDR, and also for our feedback assessment program. And what we really wanted to do was build on what we have for certifying mediators, which is a more formal, more lengthy program, and have something where we knew that there was a lot of training going on within the state. There was something missing. That was about getting that feedback, getting that assessment immediately from after you've done a mediation. And so that's where we decided to develop this program, in which we would give not only newly trained mediators, but also seasoned mediators an opportunity to have a focused, individualized, constructive feedback session. And so we developed that where we would allow have 2 assessors and two role players, and then also that candidate serve as a mediator. And we had a pilot program, and then branched on into got a small grant through Macro to be able to broaden that and provide it on 2 other occasions. So I can talk more about later in detail. But we found it to be very helpful, and that the feedback so far we've received, it's been very, very encouraging. People really have found this a useful tool, and something that was missing from those who've begun to practice and engage in the mediation practice.
Thank you, Sterling. It's so great to hear that an independent organization can really go out there and take the initiative to offer this opportunity to mediators at all levels to have a chance to have feedback. Because from what you're saying, Sterling, it seems like feedback opportunities can be a bit limited. Is that what your perspective is?
Yeah, that's what we found. We did some initial surveying and talking to our members, trying to see what we weren't getting a number of people who were coming in to get certified. And we said we think we want to provide a way so people can get some again feedback, but some way that they can. For instance, one participant said, "I've done a number of mediations, but I don't know. I have no one to tell me how am I doing. What can I improve on, or what can I do better?" And so that was the idea, and be able to provide this kind of assessment on a more regular basis, which and so that's why we developed this tool.
And what a great tool, sort of recognizing the fact that I guess for a lot of mediators, I can only speak for myself here, sometimes you're very lonely when you're not co-mediating and you don't have the type of opportunities that Tracy was referring to earlier to have that kind of direct feedback from your co-mediator, where you're going to get the feedback. So that sounds like a great program to be able to offer that to people who wouldn't have the opportunity to get it otherwise.
Can I add one thing? Yeah, let me just add one thing. One of the you mentioned in terms of we get feedback. They get feedback not only from the assessors, from the role players, and then they have a little self-assessment as well. So there are several different sources of feedback during those sessions.
So there's an interplay of different types of ways of reflecting on one's performance.
Yes.
I also love your notion, and I just want to pick it up here because I think it's very powerful. Your cello analogy that you brought to bear, I think it's fantastic. And I'm just wondering, the questions that's resonating with me is, for you, Sterling, particularly with reference to your experience and feedback. Is mediation more of an art than a science?
I think so. I think it's something that definitely you benefit from experience, from doing it as much as you can. You get better and better at it, always learning, always growing. I mean, it's something that I don't think, even like, I'm still learning, still growing, still picking up from different and others, mediators, more experienced mediators, and even new mediators, just different ways. I think that you have, it's, yes, there are tools that we have. Yes, there are some practices, best practices, but it's each new mediation is a different experience and a different, and you have to, as you, over time, you learn to what kinds of questions to ask, when to ask them, how. And I think it's definitely, I think, personally, more of an art form, though you definitely, again, there's things that you learn skills, but you have to continue to grow and expand. I think that's why I use that example. I thought it was a great example when I first heard about it. I think that speaks exactly to what we were trying to do.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I love the notion of making progress. And I just want to pick up on something you just said, and that's that every mediation is a unique experience, unique participants, unique circumstances, unique conversations, and therefore, in some sense, isn't feedback unique every time, because it's responding to something a little bit different.
Yes.
Sherry, please, can you tell us more about feedback in CMCC and your work in bringing feedback to the transformative processes in Maryland?
Sure. So in Southern Maryland, we have two centers that work together to train new mediators, both in Calvert and St. Mary's County in Maryland. So the feedback process really begins in the basic mediation training, in that, the new mediators are doing role plays and getting feedback from more experienced mediators right from the beginning. And I think as Tracy said, I totally echo. It's really important not just to point out what needs improvement, but what they're doing well. And so when we train people on how to give feedback, one of the things we tell them is start off with something that person did really well, something positive, and then move on to feedback lovingly given about what could use some improvement. So that people come out of it feeling energized and good, rather than that they've been beat up on or something. So the process starts in the basic mediation training. And then our model is a co-mediation model. So for most of our mediations, we have mediators working together to do the mediation. And part of that process is prepping ahead of time, where the mediators check in with each other about things they want to work on, but also about, where they are personally. Are they having a rough day? Are they distracted? Or are they all here? Are they excited? And sort of work together to give each other feedback about how they're going to support each other during that mediation. And then afterwards, we have mediators do a mediator self-evaluation, where they talk together about what went well during that mediation, what could have gone differently, and give each other specific feedback on what they said they wanted to work on, and any other feedback that might come up. We actually have a written form that we give mediators to guide them through that post-mediation conversation. And we highly encourage them to do that after every single mediation. So to allow at least an extra 30 minutes to go through that mediation about self-evaluation together. Then there's opportunities just throughout the year for additional mediators to get additional feedback. We do monthly trainings. Some of those include role plays where mediators can get feedback there. Advanced trainings always have, role plays are the big thing. We always have people learn a skill and practice it. You have to practice it to learn it. Reading about it and studying it and watching it can only go so far. So it's really important to do those role plays and get feedback on them. and also encourage mediators to participate in things like MCDR's Feedback Day. We had a couple of mediators participate in that. And so they were able to get feedback from other transformative mediators about their performance. And then lastly, the feedback, as Tracy said as well, we get participant feedback after every mediation. And we share that with the mediators in terms of what the participants felt like they did well, whether the participants felt supported. And then we also ask specific questions about, whether things like self-determination and confidentiality were followed. We asked the participants specific questions about, did the mediators make suggestions as to what you should do, and get feedback on that. So throughout the whole process, their feedback is just incredibly important. And we also encourage new mediators to give feedback to more experienced mediators, because I think a lot of times experienced mediators don't get the opportunity to get feedback. And as a lot of times the new mediators are sort of hesitant. They're like, oh, yeah, no, everything was great. But then when we really encourage them, well, what might you have had questions about? Did I do something that you were wondering about? And so, that's a good opportunity for experienced mediators to really look at what they're doing and whether they're following the model as they taught it to the new mediators. So I think that's really important that from the very beginning, mediators get used to giving feedback to whoever they're co-mediating with.
Thank you, Sherry. That was a really important overview, and I really appreciate it. I think that what I'm understanding from what you said is, there's multi-dimensional opportunities for feedback within the Southern Maryland centers, and you've got both structured and unstructured opportunities for feedback, as well as participant feedback. And I love that you brought up this notion of inexperienced mediators who might have some recent knowledge from training and some good theory, being able to reinforce experienced mediators and challenge them on whether maybe they've become complacent, or maybe they're just not following those original skills, or maybe something's evolved. So I think that's a great notion as well. Also love that you emphasize, practice it to learn it. That comes back to, what Tracy and Sterling were saying. It's more of an art, more of something learned along the way. From basic training on, and like a cello or an artist, if there isn't any music and there isn't a painting, the proof is in the pudding. So really love that notion as well. And you bring up a question for me that I want really to ask to everyone, because I think it sort of underscores feedback, and maybe some of the cynics of feedback and feedback processes out there who may be watching today are wondering, so through feedback, what's happening? Are mediators getting better? What is better? And how do we monitor the practice and the professional development of mediators who are engaged with our feedback processes? Anyone want to take that one first?
I'll try and jump in on that one.
Great, thanks, Sherry.
So in terms of, is feedback helping people get better? I think that really depends on the person being, how open they are to the feedback. We certainly hope that our mediators are open to receiving feedback and incorporating that and thinking, is that accurate? Is that something that makes sense to me or not? And then talking about that. I think as long as the mediator is open to hearing that feedback, they're going to get better. And I think most of our mediators are open to that. Occasionally, there are some people who just get very defensive about it, and and that's something, again, that's receiving feedback is a skill to work on as well, is how to graciously receive feedback. And so, I think that, if you can graciously receive it, and just take it in and just see if it rings true with you, I think it can be very helpful and can help people's practice. But it really depends on how willing somebody is to be open to that.
And I'll just add, I agree with everything Sherry said. We found that the participants in our feedback days, and I'm glad to hear that Sherry had some participants come. We were, the overall was positive. The responses we got, we did an assessment after, asked people to give us some feedback about the program, and everything pretty much, we have overall very, very encouraging, very positive comments about it. I mean, I think we too were wondering how people would feel about getting critical assessments. I mean, well, of course, we gave both positive and the, the positive and the deltas, but we didn't get anyone saying that, or the sessions that I observed, anything, no negative comments. No one felt really uncomfortable. They were very happy to get it, and particularly getting it from experienced mediators who have been out practicing 20 years or more. So they found that just invaluable. One person thought it was nerve-wracking, but overall they said, yeah, I'm just glad I was able to do it. And I had some questions that I've been wanting to ask and wondering how this was going. If there's something I could try, and I just felt, just hearing somebody tell me, yeah, go, try it, do this, or yeah, this worked and this didn't, was just very helpful for them. And we've done 3 times now. We're hoping to do it again, but so far we've got people more. We have more individuals who'd like to participate in the feedback days. So it's something that we're going to look to continue. And we've been able to transition in during the pandemic, because now we've been able to do it online as well, using this platform as well, Zoom. So and we were able to come up with an effective way of making it work. I know you were involved, David, and it takes some time putting it all together, but it's worked.
Absolutely, there's a huge time commitment in doing this work, but it doesn't make it any less important to do it or to offer that opportunity to people. I hope, Tracy, I can circle back to something you said earlier, because I think it's really important and sort of weaves in with what Sterling and Sherry were just saying, and that is this sort of journey to openness that's necessary. That 18 years ago you started out with feedback in your basic course, and it sounded like there was a bit of a journey there, both in learning openness, learning how to receive feedback, not just how to give it, but also remaining open through those 18 years and continuing to be able to challenge oneself with feedback. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, like a few things I would say about that. So in terms of giving feedback, I teach people, you want to give honest and respectful feedback. That's the key word. So we are prioritizing the participants when we're giving feedback to folks, and having it grounded in the respectfulness that we want between colleagues. And then in terms of receiving feedback, that we're receiving feedback with great humility. So, as in Sterling's story, there's not an end date to our growth and development as a mediator. For as long as we're practicing, we should be growing and developing. So definitely, I'm a much better mediator than I was when I started 18 years ago. And I'm not as good as I plan to be next year. I expect to grow, and to get to that next level that I want to next year, I have to be receiving feedback, and I have to, I have to start with yes, like in improv class, like you receive what folks say with a yes, maybe that's true. I'm sorry, I'm bouncing a lot. I'm on a yoga chair, yoga ball chair, and I really, it's got me bouncing a bit. The other thing is, so we're giving feedback with honesty and respectfulness. We're receiving feedback with great humility, and feedback needs to happen consistently. So I tell people that at the end of every session, you should have a dedicated feedback time. And sometimes, like I know for me on Zoom, after the end of 2 hours on Zoom mediating, I need to get off Zoom. And so I make sure that I schedule at least 30 minutes with my co-mediator at another time, another date, to make sure that we're doing that feedback, but that needs to be happening consistently. And I think that consistency, like we're not just giving feedback when there was a problem, that we're giving feedback every time, because right now the language around feedback is a lot of times when people hear feedback is given when somebody messed up. And we don't want to give feedback because we think somebody messed up. We want to give feedback consistently because we always have space and opportunity to grow.
Thank you for walking us through that journey, because I think that really emphasizes that coming back to what Sterling said about, a cellist at 95, the feedback is a lifetime journey, and we always have that growth edge, and we can always expect to be a little bit better if we can receive that with humility. And it just makes me think about times that I've had to be challenged by feedback, and like once, sometimes I feel like we don't know what we don't necessarily want to know about ourselves, right? So, I think of myself as a talker, right? And I remember a time, actually in the inclusive model in CMM, in one of the centers that Tracy works with, I got feedback that, I wasn't speaking a lot in a particular mediation, and why was I not speaking a lot? Now, my self-image is very different from someone who doesn't speak a lot. Right. But I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, it's really worthwhile to hear that and to be able to reflect on that, because, I wouldn't have picked up on that context. And that was obviously a growth edge for me, as I was getting used to practice in the inclusive model, which is not where I had originally started my mediation journey. And I'm just wondering, the three of you, because I think it's so important to personalize this and not just talk about it as an academic discussion but to make it practical. What's the greatest part of your feedback journey in terms of the feedback that you've received, as a mediator, or given as a mediator for that matter?
Well, I can jump in first. I would say going through the MCDR certification program was a eye opener. It was definitely a very it was a very comprehensive process, and getting that first time getting two experienced, sitting in front of two experienced mediators, and then plus the participants, the role players, and then being videotaped. That was a little nerve-wracking, but it was very helpful. Getting the immediate feedback about how I was doing, both the pluses and the deltas, and then getting it verbally and then written. And then having to, I don't like usually going back and looking at myself on the camera, but that was important. That was helpful as well. Getting that was the first time I'd done that. So because you can't, even now as I mediate, I really don't have, it's just me, and we don't have a co-mediation model where I mediate now. I don't really get feedback, and sometimes some participants may say something. But so that was very eye-opening, very helpful. Something I can still go back to and look at and build on, because I have the evaluation and I have the videotape as well. So I highly recommend it. I recommend. I know I'm sort of preaching our own horn, but it is. But I just found that very helpful as a mediator in my growth process.
Thanks, Sterling, for walking us through that. And I'm glad you brought up certification, because I think in many ways that's part of the culmination of some of these feedback discussions. And I want to turn to it in a moment, and have everybody give a chance to talk about opportunities for certification linked with peer-reviewed feedback, and what those might look like. And thank you for personalizing that with some anecdotes from your own journey. Tracy, Sherry, any great feedback experiences you could share?
So I've got one. Actually, it was some feedback that you gave me, David. It was during an advanced training where we were just doing some role plays, and I was co-mediating with an inexperienced mediator So I was sort of looking at it as, oh, well, this is a really great opportunity for this inexperienced mediator to get some feedback, and I'll just play along too. And it was very interesting because after the role play, I got some really useful feedback about a very basic skill that once it was pointed out to me, I realized that I was sort of straying from the model in the way I was personally teaching it to other people. So again, sort of that academically, theoretically, I was teaching it. I could see other people and give them feedback on it, but in my own practice, I was sort of drifting. And I don't know that I ever would have caught that myself. And then I also realized that it was an issue that many of the mediators in our center were also having, which I think brings up the, I sort of call it incestuousness within centers, is that if you're always getting your feedback and giving feedback to that same small group of people, you can all start drifting in that same direction. And it's always good to bring in an outside voice, somebody who you haven't been working with, to look at what you're doing with a fresh set of eyes and ears, and maybe give you some feedback on something that you were just missing within your group. So that was extremely helpful for me.
Well, thank you for that great reflection. I think it brings up a couple of really important points. I mean, not only the effect for feedback for ourselves, but realizing, often coming back to the conversation about experience versus inexperience that you brought back before, that experienced mediators in particular, if they're doing something wrong or deviating from a practice, particularly when you're in the inclusive model or the transformative model, and there are some very strict practice guidelines and philosophy behind the way one practices those models. If you're straying from it, how do you know? And if you're all in one center and you're all doing it, how can you have that practice pointed out? And I think that links back to, the importance of what Sterling was bringing to bear before with, let's have an independent feedback process like the one that MCDR offered to all mediators, that can allow some outside people to come in and who are not part of the center, who might recognize some of those key differences, or where there's that mission creep, and we've gone away from our models that we aspire to stay true to, but we don't always make it, and we need to know when we don't. So thank you very much for sharing that, Sherry. Tracy.
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of feedback that I got was my co-mediator let me know there was a huge piece in the room that I was missing, that I wasn't reading, which was that the way that I was conversing with the participants and using my reflections, the words that I choose were not accessible to the participants. At least in particular, it wasn't accessible to one of the participants. And as a result, like, that participant almost exclusively spoke to my co-mediator. So one, it was putting undue work on my co-mediator. Two, it was alienating me from that participant and was jeopardizing both mine and my co-mediator's neutrality. And since then, I pay very careful attention to the words that I use and making sure that I am keeping my language kind of in the proximity of the kind of language that the participants are using. And making sure that, and working hard, I won't say making sure, but working hard to as a mediator, so that I'm not suggesting that mediation only for folks with a certain education level or who use multiple syllabic words, but that is for absolutely everyone. And that our neutrality has to be guarded, with great effort, because, of course, the four of us are gorgeous, both inside and out. And the only reason people invite us to the conversation is because of our commitment to be third-party neutrals and anything at the table. Even something as much, as what could seem as simple as me using big words, had the potential to jeopardize my neutrality. And so that feedback from that participant has, sent me, that's been about 10 years ago. And it's been a 10-year long journey to pay attention to that. And that's one of the things I'm always asking my co-mediators to pay attention to and give me feedback on, is about the accessibility on it. And just when I think I have it, I'll have a case and I'm working on it again.
I'm guessing, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, but I'm guessing you had to have a lot of humility to receive that feedback, Tracy, and to sort of have to reflect on your practice from all those different dimensions in which your choice of words and the way you showed up as your authentic self might have compromised on neutrality and all of those other important dimensions of how we interact with participants that you mentioned.
Yeah, you know what? Thank you, David. That's a great, because I think that great humility came in stages. So when I first got the feedback, I was like, the preceding cases that I had after that, I was like, this is a little harder than I thought, and so like there was humility, and I even had to enlist my colleague, Erica Bridgeford, to be my accessibility coach. To help me keep in line with that, and when I use words that are inaccessible, like running back to her and my co-median, like what would have been more helpful? What would have been a better word right there? Yeah. So yeah, in a lot of ways, it was great humility. I like to be humble about my humility, but yes.
So thank you very much for personalizing this. I think it's really important to show how we value feedback and how we've been able to use that for our own professional development at all different levels. And I think, the four of us being experienced and being in this for a while shows the continuing, growth edge, just like that cellist, although I don't think I'm 95 or any of us are. But how we continue to learn, how we continue to grow in this artistic practice of mediation, and as you alluded to, always remembering how we show up for the parties and how the parties expect us to show up in terms of our professional practice as mediators. We've got about 15 minutes left together. Time flies by, especially when you're talking mediation. I'm sure everyone in Mediation Week knows that. And I wanna turn to this sort of maybe in some ways it's the ultimate growth edge. It's not just submitting yourself to feedback as part of a mediation process that's structured by CMM or CMCC or MCDR, but it's going that extra mile to flag that you're the type of person who wants to submit to peer review, have your professional practice scrutinized, and have your practice of the mediation field certified. Now, I know there's a lot of banner around the word certification in the mediation field from people who say they're certified because they got a 40-hour certificate and sat in the classroom for 40 hours. That's not what we're talking about today. In Maryland, we're very fortunate that we have 3 distinct mediation certification processes, which are peer reviewed in different ways. And we have 3 representatives of those processes with us here today who can tell us a little bit more about how they look and how those processes function within the organizations, and maybe a bit about how those processes are very different from, well, first of all, a 40-hour certificate, and second of all, some of the other certification processes where you pay a fee and someone looks at some documentation, but nobody actually ever sees you mediate. So I hope you can expound a little bit on that, and how that links with feedback and professional development.
Sure.
Do you want to go? Oh, I'm sorry. I was checking with. I think I had some visuals. Am I frozen?
No, you're not frozen, Tracy. You're good.
Okay.
You want to
Sherry,
put up the
did you-
visuals?
okay. I'll say while you're doing that, Sherry, I will say that I feel like I really am proud of all of our certification process and the effort and that it takes for people to go through it. And to me, as important as certification is, educating participants about the service and what they should be able to expect from a mediation process is just as important to me, because it holds us as mediators accountable. Like, I don't know what the ADA asks my dentist on the when they get certified as a dentist, and I know when I've got a good dentist, and so that's what keeps dentists, accountable. And ours is a process where we call it performance-based evaluation, where people mediate twice, once as a solo, and then they have another role play as in a co-mediation, and they have two evaluator for each one of them, and the evaluators come together to comprise their score. And I tell people that score is really nice, but what's important is that you had two strong mediators working hard to give you some excellent feedback, some thorough, excellent feedback. And we have a evaluation tool that's on 11 sheets of legal size paper at 10-point font. That's how detailed it is. 99 different points that we're looking at. And I think that everyone who's involved in the process, whether they're a role player or a mediator, grows from that level of feedback if they participate in it.
Well, thank you, Tracy. And I hope mediation is never as painful as the pain I associate with going to the dentist, even a good one. I hope no one gets certified who does cause pain in mediation. But I think some of our participants today would be really interested in seeing some of those 11 sheets. If you're willing to make them available after the presentation, that we can circulate with it, just so they can see the amazing detail and effort that's been put into developing CMM certification process over the years.
Definitely.
Great. So that's hopefully going to be available for download from the same site as this video. Sterling, Sherry, can you expand a little on your certification processes?
Or Sterling, did you want to go first?
Well, yeah, I'll go briefly and then let you do your slides. Yeah,
I'm actually not going to do the slides. I'm just going to talk through it. So.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's just similar. We have about 10 pages that we assess the candidates. They have to submit a page just describing their mediation, their style, what they're interested in accomplishing and doing, and that's reviewed. And then we want, usually they have at least 30, 40 mediations, 50 mediations under their belt. There is a fee, but because we have the assessors, two professional assessors who are specially trained for this particular, to provide the assessments. Not just anyone can be an assessor. So we have professional assessors, mediators who are then trained as assessors who give the feedback. And then we have role players who are also mediators. And I mentioned earlier that it's videotaped, which is provided to the candidate as well. And then both the assessors, once they've completed the mediation, they give them both verbal feedback and then this written assessment. And there's a particular score they have to and it gets a 3 out of 5 to pass on these different, number of different points, for just managing the relationships, managing the process. So it's a very involved process, and we do expect that individuals have experienced mediators who come through this. They can serve as role players prior to actually getting certified. And we do also, if they want some guidance and help prior to the process, we can provide that as well. Because our goal is to help individuals learn and from this process. And we're not trying out to fail people, but if they go through a process that's very detailed, that's rigorous, but also is something that they can be helpful, used for them as they continue to grow as mediators.
Thank you, Sterling. I hope you can also give us some information about the MCDR feedback process that we can post on the website with this video and share during mediation week. And just one quick question on that is, and this goes for everyone, is that process only open to people in Maryland, or are those processes, Tracy, Sterling, open to everyone?
So for the inclusive mediation model, we have had mediators from Louisiana and North Carolina certified. We are working on we've trained mediators in Miami, and we'll be training mediators in Texas shortly, in 2022. And anybody that I train, I'm setting sights on, in a couple of years, them being experienced enough in order to go through the certification process.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've also had mediators from New York, from Delaware, from other states, Pennsylvania.
Oh, shout out to our mediators in Massachusetts. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to forget you guys.
Great. So there's a real opportunity for everyone countrywide. Thank you. Sherry, can you tell us a bit more about mediation from the transformative perspective, and also, what opportunities are open to people not just in Maryland but nationwide?
Sure. So in our centers in Southern Maryland, we started thinking about and developing doing a performance-based mediator evaluation probably in around 2014, 2015, because we wanted to enable the community mediation centers who practice in the transformative model to have more of a standardized evaluation process that our volunteer mediators could go through for no cost. Since our mediators volunteer their time and don't get paid for doing mediations, we didn't think it was fair to charge them to get a performance-based evaluation. So I really need to give a huge shout out to the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformation, ISCT. They're a national organization, and they have a performance-based evaluation that they do, and it's international actually, for a fee that you can get certified in transformative mediation. And they allowed us to use their assessment model to develop our own that we then apply to our community mediators. So our performance-based assessment model is very closely related to the one that ISCT uses. And it's really got two parts to it, and both of them are equally important. A mediator needs to pass both parts to get their certification. And the first is a performance assessment that is done through a video role play. And it's a minimum of a half an hour, but a lot of people videotape longer than that. And that is evaluated by trained mediators, experienced mediators, and they're looking for particular things in that role play video. Specifically, does the mediator demonstrate the skills of the transformative model? Are the things that they're doing supportive of that model or not supportive? And so it's actually a very involved process. It takes many hours to score a video role play because we're actually looking at and scoring each interaction that we see on that video. So that's the first part of it. And the second part of it is an interactive component, which is just as important from my point of view. And that's where the mediator's own voice comes into the evaluation. And what that is there's feedback immediately after the role play from the participants, the role players, and maybe a little bit from the assessor. But then afterwards, the mediator is asked to review that videotape themselves and identify two things. One is a place during their mediation that they felt like they did an intervention that was consistent with the transformative model, and to talk about what was going on before they did that, why they chose that intervention, what was their purpose in choosing that intervention, how it affected the ongoing interaction between the mediation participants. So really talking about not just what they did, but why they did it. And then secondly, find something where perhaps they did something that was a bit inconsistent with the model. and going through the same thing. Why did they choose to intervene then? What did they do? Why wasn't it consistent with the model? And what might they have done instead that would be more consistent with the model and more supportive of the participants? And really what we're looking for throughout that whole performance-based assessment is what we call the premise, purpose, practice linkage. So we think it's really important that our mediators understand the theory of transformative mediation, that they're able to apply that theory to interactions that they see going on in the mediation and talk about why it's, why those interventions were appropriate. And then lastly, the practice, that they're able to demonstrate the interventions, not just talk about them, but actually demonstrate them in a real intervention, in a real mediation. So the whole purpose, I guess, of the transformative performance-based assessment is to look at that premise, purpose, practice linkage. And a mediator has to be able to do all three of those to pass the certification process. At this point, we haven't done anybody outside of our two Southern Maryland transformative centers, but we'd certainly be open to it if people were interested in doing that.
Wow. Premise, remind me, premise, purpose,
Practice.
Premise, purpose, practice.
premise, purpose, practice. That's wonderful.
cool.
I want to note that down. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down too.
Yeah, like
The one thing that seems to unite these processes as we come to the conclusion of our time together is the comprehensive nature of them, the scoring, the ability to get multiple peer perspectives on one's work, and the sort of comprehensive nature of the feedback of each of these opportunities. I hope, Sherry, you can also share the documentation related both to the Southern Maryland process, but also to the ISCT process you referred to.
Sure.
Then we can post all of those on the website. That draws us to a conclusion.
David.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to point out one thing that I neglected to mention. That was that in addition, that once someone is certified through MCDR, they can also apply to be certified through by the International Mediation Institute. We're a qualifying organization where our certification process has been approved by them. It's an international organization, so that they can, so mediators, certified mediators can also apply for an International Mediation Institute certification. And it's an advanced level of certification that individuals can also obtain.
Great, thank you, Sterling. And would you be able to also share with our participants some more information about that additional sort of transferable process, which takes certification to another level that's sort of offered after the initial certification?
Sure, do that.
Great. So that's great. I mean, 5 different certification processes that are all peer reviewed, 3 of them in Maryland, CMM's process, which has been used many times outside of Maryland, MCDR's process, which has been used again outside of Maryland, Southern Maryland's process, which was developed off of ISCT's process and is open to accepting people outside of Maryland. And the ISCT process is, of course, a national process and an international process that one can apply to after having gone through MCDR's certification. A lot of possibilities out there for taking peer feedback and incorporating it into your professional development towards best practice in mediation. Have a great mediation week. All I can say is it's been an absolute pleasure to spend an hour discussing with the 3 of you, and I would love if we could do this more often.
Thank you, David. Appreciate you
Thanks,
having us
David.
here. Sherry,
Right.
Sterling, it was such an honor to be on this panel with you.
And
Yes,
with
it was.
you, Tracy, Sterling.
Great. Take care.
Thank
Great
you all
work.
for joining us.